October 4th, 2020. I've been here before, yet this is the first time in history it has happened. Pouring rain, 7.5 miles in, and at this point, it was looking like a DNF. Hello and welcome to the Fat Man to Ironman Coach Marshy running podcast. I am Neil Marsh, Coach Marshy, and welcome to today's episode 3. Welcome back to all those that have been listening to the previous episodes. I hope you're all well, and I hope you've had a good week leading up to this point. From my perspective, I'm feeling completely and utterly fatigued, if I'm honest. Having taken part in the virtual London Marathon last weekend, the central fatigue for me and the actual general fatigue is huge. Not to mention the muscle fatigue that you'd expect from that kind of distance as well. So let's explain that and let's move into the episode and what we're going to talk about, because some really big things came up for me. So it was the first time in history, obviously, that the London Marathon had been held virtually. But having previously completed 13 marathons myself, of which 4 of those were London previously, I'd been in this position before. It was safe to say I'd been in this position and I had plenty of experience in this position. It was cold, it was wet, conditions were at times very windy, and all in all, it was quite a miserable weather day. And for that, that's obviously going to have a outcome and an impact on everyone who is running. But what I would say is for a virtual event, the people and the support from my running club, High Runners, the general public that were out there, and the people that were out there supporting the runners specifically on bikes was completely and utterly amazing. It really made what was a tricky situation for some, and a situation that most of us would have chosen not to have been in, it made it feel really amazing and truly a unique experience to be involved in the first virtual London Marathon. It was quite frankly amazing. There were many runners, not just from the running club that I'm part of, but also people from the general area where I live. It was amazing. There were people all over the place, but sticking to those rules and those government guidelines at this time that we find ourselves in. But it really did make a real difference. And it made what most people would have been disappointed with, having not been able to go to London and specifically take part. It really would have made it a truly unique experience, and something that I'm really proud to say that I was involved in. So I am pleased to say that I did manage to get to the end and complete that first virtual London Marathon. Will it be the last one? I guess only time will tell. However, the reason that I nearly DNF'd was really down to 2 major factors, which is what I really want to share with you on this episode. It's really important that I get this across, because I think it just shows that no matter how much experience you've got, you can still make poor choices and make mistakes. So here we go. Let's share those points with you. This goes back a long time for me. So from various race briefings, various previous experiences at races, and all the knowledge I've gained from my sports and exercise science degree, and all the books and podcasts and whatever literature that I've absorbed to get me to the level of coaching that I'm at, has led to me knowing these things, these 2 factors. But for me, during the London Virtual, I got them wrong. And let's go through those 2 things, those 2 really crucial things that you need to know about when you're taking part in a race. And by race, I don't mean necessarily a marathon. This could be any race that you take part in. This would be a factor. So point number 1, really consider that you make sure you allow enough recovery after your previous race. So if you go through the literature, the science, the experiences of others, everything that's available out there, you will find in general, from a runner's point of view, for every mile that you ran in that race, you should leave 1 mile, 1 day per mile for recovery. So for me, I was completely centrally fatigued. The body feels completely and utterly battered from the experience. And if I'm being totally honest, on the virtual London, I was in bits by mile 7. And by mile 9, it really was just looking like a DNF. Did not finish, for anyone who's not clear. Was the only option, really. That was all that was going to happen at that point. But like I said, I'm happy to say I got to the end. But no wonder, right? What would you say, guys? Those of you that are listening and have listened to the previous episodes, I had run 35 miles in an ultra marathon 14 days prior to the London Marathon Virtual. That has to be considered. That is not sufficient recovery. Do I know that as a coach? 100%. Do I know that as a runner? 100%. So for me, it's really quite important to get that point across. And I'll explain that at the end of point 2 as well, why it's so important. But what I'm saying in terms of this point and allowing that sufficient recovery is you can't expect to feel fresh if you haven't done the recovery properly from the previous race. That should go without saying. And for me, I overlooked that. Even all this time in, I still overlooked it. So that's the first point. That's the first factor which you must consider when you're running. The second factor is you don't get involved in someone else's race. So I remember sitting down at Wimbledon, Exmoor National Park, prior to the half Ironman in 2014, sitting in a race briefing. And I remember getting told this exact thing. And I remember being aware of it before. And it's something that I've really been aware of ever since. And that's really simple. Don't get involved in someone else's race. So what do I mean by that? Have you ever done that? Have you ever got involved in someone else's race? So for me, I was out there with 2 other runners and a support cyclist. And I got involved in Michelle and Joe's race. I tried, they were just a few, call it 30 seconds a mile running, maybe a little bit more at times, above where I was at. And I tried to stick with them. And I knew better than that. And I tried to stick with them because I wanted it to be special for us all and for us all to help each other get round and all these really good intention things. But actually the truth is they don't work. And that was what happened to me during my London Virtual. So what do I mean by that? You are where you are. All the other people taking part are where they are. Your training is what you've done to prepare. Their training is what they have done to prepare. It's not good trying to keep with them. All it does is it leads to massive fatigue. And you cannot get that back at the end or later on in the race. You cannot get that back, no matter how much you try to add those calories in. We'll come on to nutrition in a second. You will never get that fatigue back. And for me, in that virtual London, and I'm sure many of you can relate, there was just that little bit of a push too much that made me feel that little bit more fatigued than I normally would be had I slowed down to the pace that I was happy to be running at. So just bear that in mind. Nutrition as well. When I say don't get involved in other people's race, everyone has their own nutrition plan for a given race. So it's really important that you stick to yours. So I didn't stick to mine. I was going to fuel at 5 miles. Did I fuel? No. I waited till 6 and a bit because there was a hill and I thought it'd be appropriate to walk up it. Walking up that hill and replenishing my nutrition, yes, I understand why that would work, but the plan was at 5. So I should have stuck to that plan, but I got caught up in the other people's race. And I thought it would make sense for me to walk up that hill and do it because I knew it was coming and that would suit them as well. But it didn't. So your nutrition plan is your plan. The person in front of you and the person behind you's nutrition plan is their plan. Do not get involved. And for me, the London Marathon Virtual, I got this wrong after 11 years. I've been involved in coaching this sport and given advice, and I went completely against it. The truth is, I actually really should have listened to that advice that I've been giving others and that advice that I'd really been preaching for 11 years in that moment, because I really wanted to run with those people that I was with. I completely forgot that. And it's important not to be naive to that. You can be as experienced as you like, but if you make a bad decision, it's going to affect your race and it's going to affect what happens to you. And I just want to be really clear on something. The amount of races I've done, whether that be triathlons, half marathons, ultra marathons, yet I still chose to get it wrong. I didn't listen to some of those basic principles that I'd picked up, learned, taught myself over those years. All that experience, just in one decision, went out the window. And I want you listening to think about that every time you set out on a race. What is today's goal? Does a friend want to run with me? Are they completely invested in what I'm doing? And if they are, can they keep up with me? Or if they're going to be faster than me, will they slow down for me? If the answer is yes, then of course run with people. But actually, the intentions and the good intentions of wanting to do well, that's fantastic. And I'm all about positivity, guys. Always the glass is half full for me. But what I would say is that you will never get that fatigue back if you go out too fast because you don't stick to your plan. So bear that in mind. Just to recap it, when you're running a race, stick to your strategy and your plan. Allow for plenty of rest between events, and also know your level and don't get caught up with others. That's really important. However, bearing that in mind, what I would say is going right back to the beginning, I managed to get to the end. And that's because I went back to what I know. At about 15 miles, when I managed to get a change and get a little bit drier and warmer, I actually took it back a few steps, took it to a strategy that I know, took it to a ratio of walk running that I was happy with from an ultra perspective, applied it to the marathon, and managed to get home eventually. And I'm glad, because now I can happily say that I was part of the 40th London Marathon and I'm part of history, the first ever virtual London Marathon. But I will always take that back and take that as a, real take home for me from that event. And the take home for you today is get your realistic race plan in your head and know what you're going to do before you even get going. Get this right, and you will 100% be reducing the variables of it going wrong on the day. Get it right, and you're reducing those variables 100%. If I'd have done that in the London Virtual, things may have been a little bit different for me. So it's just something for you to consider. But anyway, Two really good points there. Two things that I wish I'd remembered. And if you enjoyed the podcast, please be sure to head over to my YouTube channel for any running tips and advice on how to help your training, how to learn more about my journey and the things that I want to pay forward to you. Don't forget to give this podcast a review and a rating. That would be really appreciated if you can. And if you can also share with anyone that you think may like it as part of their commute to work, or that they might want to listen to while they're doing their exercise, whatever it is you use a podcast for these days. But I do hope you enjoyed yourself. Please do get in contact with me through any of my social media platforms. Let me know how you got on. If you took part in the virtual London Marathon, it'd be great to hear from you. I'll certainly give you a shout out next time so that I can talk about your experiences and give you a shout out and let others know how you got on as well. And I really hope we can meet here again to discuss next week more on the Fat Man to Ironman Coach Marshy running podcast.